Therapy, by the way, is the Afghanistan of the mind. It's like an interminable slog through hostile terrain with like kind of maximum billable hours. Right. And there are at any point like 7 to 12 different
and it really
races.
It treats you to dwell lovingly on your problems.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. I mean, I think, like I've said this before on my podcast, I think that most people are not primed to intellectualize their problems, and they may be traumatized in kind of imperceptible and intangible ways, but to actually introduce that wedge of an internal monologue into your life, I think is more bad than good,
Yeah. It creates the story that you're telling and also trying to inhabit, and you ultimately fail to inhabit it successfully.
Yeah, and the other thing that's particularly dangerous now is that the superpower that people have now that's really covetable is like topping from the bottom, right? It's like being so in this day and age, I think like therapy becomes also kind of like a moral cudgel. It's like that scene in The Sopranos where Janice is talking about breaking up with Ralphie. Well, by the way, I've also said this a million times. That show was so forward thinking, so prescient. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
Amazing.
Because Janice is now the dominant personality type among left liberal.
100%.
Yeah, 100%.
But there's,
100%.
That fantastic scene where she's telling her shrink, who's basically kind of like a paid cheerleader, about how she's thinking about breaking up with Ralphie, and the shrink says, Jan, I trust you to do it with like the kindness and candor that you're known for, and of course she ends up kicking him down a flight of stairs.
Yeah. No, she's amazing. And she's totally doing this thing of like, I'm going to sort of perform whatever character is needed in the moment, and doing it in this, I mean, acting that role where you're sort of performing this disingenuity and having it come across as, wow, this is just like the kind of disingenuous like fucks I've known in real life.
So what got me through it and all of that, like unpacking that, like, like my dad just used to beat the shit out of me. Not every day, but like, wow. I was homeschooled from grades 2 through 9, but like most people think that means like I had a fundy background. No, that means my mom went to the public school to teach. My dad went to the car dealership to work. And from 7 until 5, I just sat in the house, and it was heaven because no one was talking to me or yelling at me or beating the shit out of me. And then they came home. And then like years and years of this passed, they had a terrible breakup in 96. I lived with an uncle. I lived all over the place. Like I didn't pull my life together until after I finished the PhD.
Were you from? Where was
I'm from southwestern Pennsylvania, but I grew up. My formative years were in eastern North Carolina, but it's because I was homeschooled. I have really no recollection.
That's so beautiful.
I never really left the house from grades 2 through 9. So this was all just internal, and it was awful. But by my like early into mid 30s, and Amy knows this, I had this sideline, and she knows, she's seen some of these articles. I would write other people's like suffering essays for The Observer, or like other publications like that. So if they had a quick $500 and they were like, Oliver, I need you to punch up my pain or your pain, just channel that shit. So I would do that.
Oliver, you were telling your story.
I love it. Yeah.
Beautiful. And you'd gotten promoted. Wait, you've gotten promoted into the upper class. This was through some educational thing. They were coming looking for parole children dressed in their gray burlap uniforms.
I could help.
And they just measured your head with skull calipers. And sorry.
Yeah. Well, in one case, one was a friend from the PhD cohort I was in. I had helped her finish. I wrote her dissertation basically along with mine. University of Pittsburgh.
There you go.
Yeah. So I end up doing this, and as I'm doing it, I'll just do it. It's a quick 2 hours some nights for $500 or $600. That's good. Like 2 hours of work. That's a good rate. That's not bad.
Sure.
But what I realized as I was doing it was, I look back on my abuse now, and I am like nostalgic for it. Because like the interim between when it wasn't happening, when I would just be sitting there reading stacks of books or whatever the fuck I was doing, it was so peaceful and quiet, just like it is at nighttime.
It was incredibly formative, right?
Yeah,
I mean, it allowed it, like it gave you space, it held space for you. Sorry. Like I want to use the terminology now. Like it held space for you to become the person you are now.
Yeah, I was able to focus on my feelings in that space and form. So by the like gap they gave me in my day helped me channel what was happening to me in the moment. But then, as years passed, I dealt with it. I mean, I was an upset and angry 20 or 20 something, like a lot of people, not sad, just angry. But by my mid 30s, as I had some career success, and I also did all of these essays, there were probably 36 of them in total. I realized as people would tell me, oh, nobody can capture your pain like my pain, like you. And I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, sure.
You're like, I actually had actual pain, motherfucker, and I don't dwell on it. Right? And actually, it turns out that the more you dwell on pain and problems and sensitivity, it turns out that actually the more of it you have. And that's a sort of reality that kind of therapy culture doesn't want.
Putting this stuff in somebody else's essays, and I wrote some of my own, but never in like a really over the top, like fulsome treatment of this. But like by putting it in someone else's essays, I was able to bid goodbye to it. Just like pass it off or realize that it was just product and it was fine. And I went through it the same as, you went through a shift at the McDonald's. Like you learned how to work the fucking hamburger tray.
Well, I mean, it really is an open question, though. Is it the trauma that causes the damage, the malfunction, or is it the revisiting of the trauma, the intellectualizing
I think it's the latter.
Of the trauma?
I think there's a lot of revisiting of trauma. And, there's clearly a level of trauma where you're like, okay, I've like locked you in your closet for the first 10 years of your life. Your visual cortex will never work properly. You'll be less like deranged, gibbering animal, right? But, like for basically, the people that I've met, like I tend to be, attracted by people who've had sort of weird traumatic childhoods. I was a foreign service brat. My weirdest, most traumatic childhood experience was just having to go to an American public high school as a sophomore at the age of 12, which is severely fucked, right? But come on, I wasn't like beaten. Well, I was beaten, but not that much. But I wasn't beaten at home, where I had to trust, so like the level of trauma there is like it's sort of risible compared to yours, but it's like basically when people are like, I'm talking to this girlfriend of mine, and I'm like, basically, I'm talking about my ex-wife, which is apparently like a bad thing to do. And I'm like, basically, there really wasn't anything. I mean, my ex-wife had her father die of the same heart condition when she was 8 years old. And I was like, yeah, there isn't anything. There's nothing that triggers Jen. There's nothing like you can't talk about in front of Jen. Like I could talk about her father's death. I don't really care to. Like, and this girlfriend who spends enormous amounts of time like perfecting her understanding of like herself and can't talk about this or that or the other thing because it's too upsetting. It's like really she had like no like triggers. And I'm like, yeah, no, she was just a kind of human being, and the thing is that basically what happens is people have something, it's like a painful memory. It's a thing that disturbs them. And they start sort of exploring that and probing at the wound. And it's like, and this is a weird analogy, but I was in Austin in May and they have mosquitoes there. Like where I am, there's no mosquitoes. They have mosquitoes there and they bite without warning, no permission granted. And they leave these enormous bites, and then the bites itch and you scratch them. And then the scabs and the sores that are created by the bites itch them, and then you scratch them. And I have mosquito bites that I got in May that are still healing and still itch. Right. And so, there's this kind of scratching this scab or this itchy sore feeling about a lot of these practices where they're basically sort of rewarding you for obsessing about kind of the preciousness of yourself. And then it basically seems like a totally reasonable request to be like, oh yeah, I can lash out at you, but you can't lash back at me.
It's like sitting in a diaper, Curtis, till the urine in the diaper causes the bottom area to get inflamed. As you know, yes. It does. And so
it does. I've made this mistake not often, but it's like so embarrassing. It's like, wow, I'm like a crackhead mom here. Right. But sorry, go on.
No, but it really does. Like if something like you let the diaper fill up, and there's something, I guess, probably comforting to that. But it also causes acid buildup.
The reason you change diapers, right?
Yeah.
Not just because it upsets them. I mean,
You'll get this huge fucking red, like skin, acid irritated rash.
You know, Aquaphor. You'll need some Aquaphor. You'll need some whose butt cream it is. Somebody's butt cream is a serious product.
But these adults want to walk around. These adults want to walk around in crinkled diapers that no baby could tolerate, that are full of their thoughts, that they sometimes they even probably scratch down there to further inflame it, and it's just really fucking crazy.
I honestly, I just think at this point, I think it's a weapon, and I think that functionally, like the class sort of disciplinary function that it serves is that it basically, I think by sort of conceiving of themselves as these sort of like wounded warriors.
Well, right, and it's
like every time you sort of talk about, you know, certain types of trauma, certain types of pain, you're sort of delineating like what constitutes like things that are worthy of consideration. And I know I bring this up all the time, but to me, it's so conspicuous the extent to which like all these women who've had like every advantage in life handed to them, like in sort of, you know, the upper echelons of the professional class are constantly whining about trauma. And it's like, bitch, you've never dealt with anything, like ever. No. Yes. And like there is an actual epidemic in the middle of your country.
There's a defining
people are dying dead, and it's very at this just fucking rapid clip, and you're crying vomitably in public. It makes me so angry.
I mean, well, okay, but
people
so
have had actual trauma. They're just so different from that.
Yes.
Like,
well, that's the thing. Like, I also don't, and this is something I've always loved about Anna as well. It's just the like, I do think there's actually something supremely undignified and like, really tacky in sort of like selling, whether it's like parts of your inner life or even just like fake constructed versions thereof. Like, as much as I'll reveal bits and pieces of my life in this podcast, I'm very cognizant of not, you know, selling, you know, stories and like selling my family out, even like we had enormous trouble. Like, I don't want to sort of like shame my family and sort of like turn them into this like commodity that I just sort of like hawk publicly to sort of gain like a certain form of like social or cultural capital in terms of like being some traumatized subject. You know what I mean? Like, there's something I think really undignified and also just like exploitative about it, I think.
Well, it's funny to watch it go down now with the Taliban situation, because it's all these women who ordinarily bitch and moan about their like 6-figure like professional managerial like Korean girls like freaking out about women being oppressed in Afghanistan. I have a big issue with the kind of like move from like adversarial justice to like therapeutic justice or governance. In the time of my intellectual hero, Christopher Lasch, who I love, by the way, because he was also an unoriginal stick in the mud, much like me. This was called, compassion politics. Now we call it empathy politics.
Politics, yeah.
And and of course, like I think like this large scale therapeuticization of like American life and American politics is a real drag. But I agree with you, Curtis, that you can't get angry or be butthurt